The temptation of steel and the birth of a myth. Imagine it, a perfect blade, capable of slicing through a falling silk scarf or severing a machine gun barrel. In mass culture, the katana is almost a magical object, the pinnacle of engineering, forged from indestructible steel. But what if I told you that the very soil of Japan was working against the swordsmiths? That the legendary layering was not a stylistic choice, but a desperate measure to salvage abysmal raw materials. Today, we are stripping away the gold leaf from the legends. We will trace the journey from straight Chinese swords to the curved death in the hands of a samurai. You will learn why Japanese Tamahagane steel is both a curse and a triumph of will over physics. We'll break down how these blades were actually forged and why most of what you've seen in the movies is a beautiful lie. Welcome to the real history of the katana's evolution. Myth number 1. The katana has always existed. It didn't. For a long time, the Japanese fought with straight swords called chokuto, which often snapped during the first serious encounter with cavalry. The true katana is the result of evolutionary selection in the fires of civil wars. We will explore how the sword's shape changed under the influence of the Mongol invasions and why a crushing defeat forced the masters to change the very structure of the metal itself. In this chapter, we will lay the foundation. We'll talk about satetsu, the iron sand gathered from riverbeds, and the tatara furnaces that burned for 3 days straight. This isn't just a story about iron. It's a story of how something that became the soul of the warrior class was born out of dirt and impurities through fanatical labor. Get ready. We are beginning our plunge into an era where a blade was worth more than life itself. From rags to riches. The secret of Tamahagane, the main secret of the katana, lies not in magic, but in chemistry. Unlike European masters who had access to relatively pure ore, the Japanese worked with what was literally under their feet, black iron sand. This sand contained massive amounts of phosphorus and sulfur, elements that make steel brittle. To obtain even a drop of high-quality metal, the smiths had to build massive clay furnaces called tatara. The smelting process lasted for 72 consecutive hours. The masters barely slept, constantly maintaining the temperature and feeding the fire with charcoal. In the end, the furnace was destroyed to extract the kera, a massive steel bloom. This is where the true selection began. Only about 10% of this block became high-grade Tamahagane steel. The rest was discarded or used for common household tools. The myth of a million layers. You've likely heard that a katana is folded thousands of times. In reality, it is usually folded between 12 and 15 times. The math is simple. 15 folds result in over 32,000 layers. This is more than enough to evenly distribute carbon throughout the volume and hammer out impurities. If you fold it any further, the steel becomes too homogeneous and loses its unique properties. Folding isn't a way to make a super weapon. It's a way to purify inferior ore. The master smith was more than just a craftsman. He was an alchemist. He could judge the carbon content by the color and grain of the fractured steel. The hard steel, hagane, was used for the cutting edge, while the soft steel, shingane, formed the core. This is Japan's true engineering genius, creating a sandwich where a hard outer shell provides the sharpness, while a soft core absorbs the shock, preventing the sword from snapping like a glass rod. It was a technological response to the scarcity of resources, elevated to an absolute art form. The line between life and death, Hamon, and differential hardening. If you look closely at a high-quality katana, you will see a misty, whitish line running along the edge. This is the Hamon, the visual result of the most critical moment in a sword's creation, differential hardening. Many people believe this is simply a decorative pattern, but in reality, the Hamon is the physical boundary between two different crystalline structures of the metal. Before committing the blade to the fire, the smith coats it in a special mixture of clay, charcoal, and stone powder. The cutting edge receives a paper-thin layer, while the spine, the mune, is covered in a thick coat. When the blade, heated to approximately 800 degrees Celsius, is plunged into the water, a miracle occurs. The edge, protected only by a thin layer, cools instantly, transforming into ultra-hard martensite. The spine, however, cools more slowly, remaining as flexible perlite. It is at this exact moment that the blade acquires its famous curve, the sori. Because of the different cooling speeds, the metal expands unevenly, and the sword literally pulls itself into an arch toward the spine. If the smith miscalculated the clay composition or the water temperature by even a few degrees, the blade would crack. The sound of that crack, a sharp ping, meant weeks of labor vanished in a second. The Hamon is the sword's passport. By studying its pattern, experts can identify the smith's school and even the era it was forged. But it is vital to understand. Movies often show swords with Hamons that are merely etched with acid or painted on. A real Hamon is a three-dimensional structure that cannot be rubbed away. It is the physical embodiment of balance. The edge must be hard enough to cut, but the rest of the sword must be resilient enough to survive. We will explore how the Japanese learned to walk this razor's edge, creating a weapon that had no equal in metal fatigue tests of its time. Katana versus reality, testing and the twilight of an era. It is time for the sharpest question of all. How good was the katana in an actual fight against other types of weapons? The internet is flooded with videos of a katana supposedly slicing through a European longsword. Spoiler alert, that is a marketing stunt. The katana is a highly specialized tool. It is perfect for drawing cuts against soft armor made of leather and silk, or against unprotected areas of the body. However, against a European knight in full plate armor, a katana would be practically useless. The hard but brittle edge would simply chip away upon striking the high-quality steel of a breastplate. The Japanese sword was never intended for Western-style steel-on-steel fencing. Samurai made every effort to parry strikes, using the flat of the blade or the spine to avoid damaging the precious edge, the myth of eternal sharpness. In movies, a samurai cuts through enemies for years, and his sword remains razor sharp. In reality, after every battle, the blade required maintenance. There were specialized masters, polishers, whose work was valued as much as the smiths. The polishing process could take up to a month, using up to 10 different types of stones. It was the polisher who truly revealed the Hamon we discussed earlier. The evolution of the katana didn't end because it reached perfection, but because gunpowder arrived on the battlefield. Yet, even then, it didn't disappear. It transformed from a weapon into a status symbol, the soul of the samurai. In this chapter, we will discuss how during the Edo period, swords became works of art, and their testing, tameshigiri, evolved into a strict ritual performed on the bodies of criminals. We will see how functionality gave way to aesthetics while still preserving that deadly potential that continues to captivate collectors around the world. Why do we still admire them? In summary, we can say the katana is not the best sword in history in an absolute sense. It is the best sword for the conditions in which it was born. It is a triumph of the human spirit over scarce resources. When you lack high-quality ore, you develop the technology of multi-layered forging. When you need to slice rather than crush, you invent differential hardening. Today, an authentic katana, created according to the Nihonto canons, costs tens of thousands of dollars. It isn't just an antique, it is a living tradition. In Japan, there are still blacksmiths who work exactly like their ancestors did 500 years ago. They use the same sand, the same charcoal, and the same clay. Why do we continue to watch samurai films and spend millions studying their weaponry? Perhaps because, in an age of plastic and assembly line production, we crave that level of uncompromising dedication. Every movement of the master was aimed at achieving perfection, where the slightest mistake led to total failure. The katana teaches us that flaws are not a death sentence, but a challenge. Inferior ore became the reason for inventing a unique forging process. The brittleness of steel led to the creation of a complex composite structure. This is a story of how limitations give birth to masterpieces. If you enjoyed this breakdown of reality versus myth, subscribe to the channel. We have many more stories ahead about how the legendary legacy of the past was actually created and lived. If you like this format, let us know in the comments.